en un antes y un después. Un nombre que se nos dio como sello de autoridad y esperanza. Un nombre que está sobre todo nombre, sobre toda potestad, sobre todo principado. Hay un nombre que habla de amor y sacrificio, mientras habla de victoria y eternidad. Jesús es el príncipe de paz, justo y verdadero, eterno, Salvador, Mesías, Rey de reyes, Rey de justicia, Rey de gloria, Hijo del hombre e Hijo de Dios. Jesús es el camino, la verdad y la vida. Ese nombre celebramos hoy. Jesús.
Today, it seems as though we've lost all control. Can't go to work, have to stay home. This virus is spreading from state to state and city to city, person to person. What if it reaches me? What if it reaches my family? What if it gets to my parents? There's so many things that are falling apart, and as we're grasping for something sturdy, it just seems like there's nothing to stand on. And yet we have a provider, a protector. I want you to know that whatever you feed grows. And we feed our fears get bigger and bigger and bigger and overwhelm us. We can turn intrusive, disruptive thoughts of being afraid into conversations with the Father. I know it's challenging right now to love your neighbor as yourself in the midst of these constraints, but constraints are the birthplace of innovation. Some of you will ask, what can we do? And some of you will ask, what can we do? No virus, no epidemic, no sickness, disease, no economic loss or stock market crash is going to stop the church. Your anxiety and your worries can be a real gift to you when they push you closer to the Father.
En el último análisis, cuando corremos las cortinas de lo superficial y vamos al fondo de la cuestión, en todas las problemáticas humanas encontramos que absolutamente todas responden a un problema de paternidad. La mayoría de las personas no pueden reconocer esto y se quedan solo con las consecuencias o manifestaciones de esa carencia paterna o de esa paternidad distorsionada o de esa paternidad ausente o de esa paternidad destructiva. Eso hace que la gente viva con un vacío en sus corazones que les impide tener una vida plena. La paternidad de Dios es lo que nos sana, lo que nos afirma, lo que nos da sentido perfecto de aprobación, lo que nos equilibra. Soy el pastor Carlos Mraida y quiero ofrecerme para guiarte a experimentar una restauración de tu paternidad y que puedas alcanzar plenitud en tu vida. Esto sanará tu pasado y te impartirá la seguridad de ese futuro maravilloso que papá tiene para ti.
Dios Padre Celestial, te alabo por este tiempo.
Levanto a la cumbre y a todos los líderes del mundo a ti.
El mundo necesita líderes en este instante.
Y pido que Dios le dé a los líderes de todo el mundo claridad y sabiduría.
Yo levanto a todos los líderes del mundo ante tu presencia, Padre Celestial.
Envíanos para que ayudemos a las personas a ser más unidas y así lograr que el reino de Dios pueda crecer en la tierra.
Que las vidas sean transformadas y que nuestras naciones y nuestro mundo sean mejores.
Y Dios, te pedimos un espíritu de avivamiento. Pedimos que tu espíritu se derrame por doquier.
Que nuestra visión sea más grande que nuestras circunstancias y que tú seas esa visión.
Oh Dios, por favor interviene, fortalece a tu pueblo, bendícelo, que todos los líderes vean que hay esperanza, incluso en medio de la desesperación.
Jesús, que podamos ver al otro lado de la cumbre global de liderazgo de este año, Jesús. Un mundo lleno de esperanza, más lleno de justicia, más lleno de unidad, que nosotros, los líderes que asistimos a la cumbre global de liderazgo, creemos un cambio duradero a este mundo. En el nombre de Jesús, amén.
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 Today's Mums Chat is on the subject of parental responsibility. I'm referring to that moment, whenever it comes, that you find yourself alone for the first time without any support from hospital staff or family members after the birth of your child. The weight of responsibility sits squarely on your shoulders and you feel out of your depth. This moment arrives at different times for each of us. I had an extended stay in hospital after the birth of my daughter, and I was able to access a unit that gave extra support to learn breastfeeding. The midwives running the unit were so caring. My first night there, they offered to take my baby away for a few hours so that I could sleep. I was so relieved not to be expected to look after my daughter on my own immediately after giving birth. I gladly trusted them to help me and my baby. A few days later, when I went home, my mum was there to help for a couple of weeks. She's a Christian, a trained nurse, and obviously a mum herself, so her presence was very reassuring for me and my husband. But the moment came when my husband went back to work and my mum drove herself back to her home in Wales, about 3 hours away. Oh, I remember very well standing in the lane outside my home, waving my mum, my safety net, goodbye. I felt lost, incapable, totally out of my depth, and I shed a few tears as I walked back into my house to face being a mum to my daughter on my own for the first time. It felt very lonely, and the weight of responsibility rested so heavily on my new mum shoulders. Even though I knew I had to dig deep, roll up my sleeves and get on with it, it took me a long time to feel ready to leave the house on my own with my daughter. I was worried about my ability to care for her away from the house, about her getting a virus, about my being able to handle her pram in and out of the car, and what I'd do if she needed a nappy change or breastfeeding while we were out. I hadn't come to terms with life now being messy and unpredictable, with baby bodily functions spilling out at random intervals. I needed reassurance in bucket loads. I'd given birth on a beautiful day in July and the summer weather was glorious. I could have been outside enjoying the fresh air, but I spent at least another week mainly inside recovering from childbirth and gaining my confidence to leave the house. For a new mum, encouragement and reassurance that you're doing just fine is a necessity in those early days. Finding your feet as a mum, especially once you are on your own with sole responsibility for your baby, takes time. You need wisdom that you don't have and confidence that you don't feel. Solomon felt very much like this when he was suddenly made king of Israel by his bedridden father, King David, just before his death. Solomon was not expected to become king. He was not David's oldest son. But God told David that Solomon should be his successor, and suddenly Solomon was responsible for an entire nation's well-being and leadership. He had not received kingly training. His elder brother Adonijah would have been the natural choice to receive that, and all the Israelites expected the oldest son to become king. But Adonijah displeased God, and he was passed over. Solomon was thrust into the limelight with not only kingly responsibility, but the job of building God's temple in Jerusalem. Oh, how Solomon must have felt like a new mum with her first infant when he became leader of the Israelites. And now that his father was dead, who could he turn to for help? His safety net was gone. We know that responsibility landed heavily on his shoulders because Solomon prayed in 1 Kings 3 verse 7, saying, "Now Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people who you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count. So give your servant wisdom and knowledge to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" He knew he was totally out of his depth. He felt like a child doing a man's job, inadequate and ill-prepared. King Solomon asked for wisdom, and God was pleased and granted his request. In the same way, if you feel inadequate and ill-prepared, God will certainly answer your prayer for parental wisdom in raising your child. James 1 verse 5 confirms this. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Please be reassured, this feeling of being out of your depth with parental responsibility is universal. Every first-time parent and many second and third-time parents feel the same. But God has wisdom available to us if we choose to ask him for it. And we will need it, not only when our children are tiny babies, but throughout parenthood. Every stage of raising a child throws up new challenges that we will navigate so much more skillfully with God's wisdom. Matthew 7 verse 7 confirms this. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. So let your heart be reassured. You will have to learn by doing, like every other parent before you, and also like Solomon. But you have access to God's wisdom to help you. And with God's wisdom comes God's peace. Colossians 3 verse 15 tells us, the peace that God gives is to guide you in the decisions you make. So don't delay. Pray for God's wisdom and peace to rule your heart from now on as you fulfill your parental responsibilities, and smile. God will help you. You have a beautiful baby in your life, and this little person will bring so much joy, and you are on track to becoming a wise, capable, God-led parent. Be blessed.